put a star next to your question and I'll make sure I get to it at the end. So today's webinar, I'm going to cover why I believe that it's critical to reevaluate our parenting style as our children approach the teenage years. That's especially important when they are a teenager, but you can gradually adjust your style as your children become pre-teens. I'm also going to cover why your relationship changes when your child grows into a teenager. I'm going to explain to you the 3 keys to solving the teenage puzzle, and I'm going to give you some tips to take away with you and put into practice today. And also, because this is a really short webinar today, I just want to explain to you that I'm not going to be able to tell you everything you need to know to make your to crack your teenage puzzle. So towards the end of the time today, if it's okay with you, I'm going to tell you about how you can get in touch with me and how you can do some more work with me. So that's me. I'm going to tell you a little bit about me. So I don't know about you, but I can't really remember very much about growing up before the time I was about 10. But things are quite clear in my memory from the age of 10. I particularly remember at that age going for an entrance interview at a school, and the headmistress asked me whether I knew what I wanted to do when I grew up. And I confidently answered, much to my mother's horror, that I wanted to be in the Nolans. And at that time, it didn't even occur to me that the Nolans were actually a family band, or indeed that they were Irish, and that I was neither one of those. That just wasn't an issue for me. A few years later, 2 or 3 years later, Lady Diana Spencer came on the scene, and I thought maybe I could be a nanny. I really, really like the idea of looking after someone else's children, maybe living in somebody else's house. That all seemed quite exciting to me because, you know, she was on the television a lot, and you know, she actually was going to become a princess. So, you know, perhaps that was my line into becoming a princess. But because of the school I went to, I was labelled as one of the very clever girls. And I was very clearly told that I should aim higher than that. So somewhere along the line, a few months, years later, I thought that perhaps forensic psychology sounded interesting. Again, it's that kind of line of work is all about getting to know people, getting to know what motivates them, you know, why people have done what they've done, and how to heal that, probably. So from the age of 10 through being a teenager, I didn't really have a very clear idea about what I wanted to do or what I thought I was good at, probably. So in the end, I applied to do a psychology degree. But because I've always loved life, I perhaps lived life a bit too full on and actually didn't get the A-level grades I needed to do a psychology degree in the university I wanted to do it in. So in the end, I chose to do a teaching degree, which was fantastic. I think, actually, I've said to my mum recently, I think probably that's the best thing that could have happened, because had I got better A-level grades, I wouldn't have got into teaching, and I possibly wouldn't be doing the job that I'm doing now. So when I did my degree, I had really high hopes. I was a real idealist, wanted to be the best teacher these children had, was really idealist. You know, I loved being in the classroom, loved being around children, loved talking to parents, all of that, you know, offering help. But for me, I just felt very hemmed in by the system, and I wasn't very good at fitting into somebody else's system. So I did teach for a few years, had various teaching jobs in different schools, held different posts, went on to do some project work for Bromley Education Authority. And then I had my children. So after I had my children, I was very fortunate, and I took the opportunity to reevaluate what I wanted to do. And I was very lucky to be able to do some training in areas that I really loved and was really interested in. I trained, I qualified in homeopathy, I became a Tai Chi instructor, and I qualified in holistic massage and sports massage and Reiki, which is all great. That's all, and I love doing that work. But again, a bit like I was as a teenager, not really very focused. And then I met two really, really lovely ladies who run a company called The Chrysalis Effect. And through them, I learned a huge amount about ME and chronic fatigue syndrome. And that still really interests me. I love working with ME recoverers. But I've always had this real hankering for working with children and young people. So when my daughter became ill with post-viral fatigue, I put together everything that I'd learned through teaching, through complementary therapies, through working with chronic fatigue sufferers, and through talking to other parents about how ill my daughter had been. And I discovered that actually teenage years, it's not just a problem with the stroppiness and the arguing. What seems to happen is that for some families, the teenage years can become a really pivotal point for the teenager, and a pattern of not forming relationships well, not being connected to people, and ill health can lead from that. Huge amounts of anxiety in teenagers. It's in the news almost weekly now, the levels of depression in teenagers and young people. And it led me to really looking at what I had done with my teenage daughter and how together we had rebuilt her confidence, her self-esteem, her ability to communicate more effectively, and her general well-being. And so today I'd like to share with you some of the keys that I discovered for you to do that, and I call it cracking the teenage puzzle. So let's go on to the next slide. So first of all, what should parenting be like? And by the way, if you have any comments to make, just pop them in the box and I'll read them out. So I'm just going to have a little look in the box now. Okay, let's get the chat box up. Okay, so no one's got any comments at the moment. Okay, so there are loads of different messages out there about parenting, and we absorb those consciously and unconsciously. So one of the comments that you hear all the time is that parenting is the toughest job in the world. You get no thanks for being a parent. Kids don't come with a manual, and you just have to make it up as you go along. So as a parent, I'm guessing that doesn't actually fill you with much confidence, doesn't fill you with any joy. Parenting is a tough job and you don't get any thanks for being a parent. Well, who wants to do a job they don't get any thanks for? And I'm just going to read you out a couple of quotes that I found. The first is by Ray Romano, and he's written, "Having children is like living in a madhouse. Nobody sleeps, everything's broken, and there's a lot of throwing up." So that sounds great. If you heard that before you had children, you wouldn't do it, would you? Bill Cosby has said, "No matter how calmly you try to referee, parenting will eventually produce bizarre behaviour, and I'm not talking about the kids. Their behaviour is always normal." So he's saying that being a parent sends you around the bend, basically. So we also absorb ideas from, before we have our children, when we have our children, we absorb ideas about parenting from watching our friends with their children. And we decide whether that's how we think parenting should be, or how it shouldn't be. I know I've done that in the past. And of course, our most direct experience of parenting comes from being parented ourselves. And when you think about your parents and your experience of childhood and your teenage years, you'll make a decision about whether you want to do it like your parents or not like your parents. And yet other people don't actually make any kind of conscious decision at all about parenting, and they get through day by day, and hopefully it's all okay. But then when there's a problem, as parents, we're kind of forced into making a decision about how we are parenting our children. And of course, when you have your baby, you might have spent hours on the internet or in Waterstones looking at parenting books, and parenting books and parenting styles come in and out of fashion. So we're very influenced by that as well. And of course, this is your kind of archetypal image of parenting a teenager. It's just about arguing. So, oh my goodness, what's happened there? Oh, sorry about that. I'm not doing very well with the PowerPoint. Okay, no. Okay, that's the one I want. So all of these ideas just generally make us feel like we're doing a bad job and that we're a failure. And if you get through your children's childhood, you're lucky. So when you feel bad, what are your options really? You can do nothing and you can still feel bad, or you can parent them harder, and by that I mean you can put very, very many more strict boundaries in place and tell them. I hear that all the time from parents of particularly younger, preteens and 13-year-olds mainly, that they're still children. They tell me these are children and they need to realise they're children, that they're not grown up, and I'm going to tell them how it is. And I totally understand that. Or the other alternative, when things haven't gone right, is just to really ease off and let them do whatever they want to do. So I'd be really interested in, how you feel about parenting and what you do when there's a crisis. Okay. So when your children were small, it doesn't seem quite so difficult. I know when they're toddlers, when they're babies, toddlers, maybe when they start to go to school, they have tantrums and they can be difficult, but actually everything's fine pretty much. You can control them, you can physically pick them up. When children, generally, I think little children are delightful, and they're, generally happy, they're generally well behaved, they have the odd kind of little spat. But once they become teenagers or preteens, somehow we don't understand them anymore. They seem like there seems to be adults, children, teenagers, and they're in that kind of gap in between childhood and adulthood that we just don't understand. And we perhaps feel like we've got a growing monster in our house or an alien, and everything you say or do just seems to make everything worse. Then you get into this sort of downward spiral, this cycle of being cross with them, having to tell them what to do, they shout back at you, you get upset, so you do something else, they get upset, and it's a terrible time. It makes you feel terrible, your teenager feels terrible, and you don't know what to do. So what do you do? What do you do? So I'll be interested to see what you've tried. And from experience, I tried lots and lots of things. I've never really been one for laying the law down and actually telling my children, my teenagers, what to do. Because I remember my parents being like that with me, and I really, really loathed being told what to do. And even as an adult, I just really object to being told what to do. I'd much rather be asked and encouraged. And of course, yeah, there has to be boundaries. But again, with it, along with these conflicting ideas about what parenting is like, when there's a problem with your teenager, the school will tell you to do something. You might be advised to go to a counsellor. They'll tell you to do something else. You might go to the doctor. They'll tell you what to do. And some of that, you may think, yeah, that's okay. But some of it, you might think, oh, do you know, that doesn't feel the right thing for me to do. And I really don't want to do that. But everybody's expecting me to do something, and I've got to do something. But I'm not really very comfortable with that. And I'm going to suggest to you today that if you are doing something with your teenagers, if you've tried a particular strategy or approach and you feel really bad about it, it's probably not the thing that you should be doing. And I'm going to really encourage you to look for a style and a method and a strategy that's really congruent with your values and your beliefs. Because if you feel bad about the way you're parenting your teenager and not comfortable, your teenager will pick up on that. And I believe that the situation is likely to get worse. You know, it's a normal part of a teenager growing up and, you know, this developing independence that sometimes they will kick out against you to various degrees and really want to do things their own way. So if you're feeling uneasy and you're shaky about something, they will sense it, whether they're conscious of it or not. They will sense it, and you will become a target for them. If they're trying to kick out at somebody and you've got this sort of uneasy, oh, I'm not sure, you're becoming the victim, and that energy will almost encourage them to kick out at you. And that's not really what they need. They need you to be there being firm and confident in whatever you've decided to do. But if you've been told and you believe that the teenage years are just a really difficult time, then you really, you know, why should you expect anything any better from them? I've heard somebody else say teenage years are just a phase and you have to keep your fingers crossed and hope that they'll come out well at the end. Well, you know, how does that make you feel? How does that make you feel that, you know, you have to hope that they're going to come out well at the end? You know, because if you do accept that phase theory, then you don't have any control over the situation that's going on in your own home. And you have this internal dialogue going on. If I was a good parent, then this wouldn't be happening. I'd be doing something like this. But I'm really, really unhappy about doing it like that. So I'm going to talk a little bit now about the traditional rules of parenting, because I think in many ways the whole concept of being a teenager is quite a sort of modern thing, really. It's a modern idea that really started in the 50s. And, you know, before the 50s, you were a child and then you left school and you went to work and you were an adult, and there was nothing in between. But during the 50s and very much in the 60s, this whole new group started, the teenage group. And I think perhaps our ways of parenting need to reflect that a bit better. So some of the traditional rules of parenting are: Children should do as they're told, and they should do it straight away. And if you consider your teenager to be a child, that applies to them too. So I'm going to suggest maybe small children do need to be told what to do and what not to do for their own safety. And actually, because their brains are not developed enough, they don't have enough consciousness to be able to make decisions for themselves. But actually, when they start to become teenagers, they are learning about themselves and they are developing independence. And to be constantly told what to do undermines that independence. And they really object to that. They hate it. Now, that's not to say they're not going to make mistakes, because they will. But if we don't allow them independence, then we're not allowing them to develop into adults. So another one of those traditional rules is that you should argue with your teens. Parenting them is a battle of wills. They will be objectionable, but you need to win. You have to win. You are the parent. But again, you know, teenagers, I've just said teenagers are learning about themselves. They're learning about their own values. They're starting to question your values as a parent. And of course, sometimes they will disagree with you. And I've just said sometimes they will get it wrong. But again, it's a learning process and you can support that. So another rule of parenting is that you as the parent just have to be thick-skinned. Parenting is a thankless task and you should expect abuse from your teenager. You know, I see people all the time arguing with their teenagers and they just seem to accept this torrent of abuse that gets thrown at them. So, you know, I'm going to suggest to you, assert yourself and tell them how it's going to be. Do you really want a war zone? So yes, I'm going to encourage you to assert yourself, but I've just got a message from Anna saying that she can't hear. My microphone is actually working. Could I get everybody else to just type in the box whether you can hear me or not? I'm going to carry on because I can see that my microphone is working and it is broadcasting. Actually, I'm going to just type no, I'm not going to type a reply. Okay, so if you're living in a war zone, you're not really going to connect. Oh, good, Anna, she's back now. Excellent. So yeah, if you're living in a war zone, you know, life is very, very uncomfortable for you and your teenager. You won't connect with them and you're never going to find out what's going on. So when I say assert yourself, I mean be clear in your values, be clear in your views. I'm getting a few messages. Let's just have a look. Some people can hear and some people can't. Okay, so at least I know I am broadcasting. That's brilliant. Yeah, so be clear, be assertive, but don't bully and manipulate, because, you know, our teenagers are, you know, they're worth more than that, aren't they? They're better than, you're better than that as a parent. They're worth more than that, than to be bullied and manipulated. And actually, I would say if you're bullying your teenager into doing something, what's that setting up for your future relationship? But of course, how do you avoid this kind of situation? You know, that's our view of parents and teenagers, isn't it? How do we avoid those sorts of situations? So I'm just going to tell you now about the 3 keys, the 3 underlying keys that bear these in mind all the time. And actually, what I'm going to say now is write these down. If you take nothing else away from this webinar, these are the 3 things that you need to know. So make sure you write them down. So the first key is to love and accept them. The second key is to listen to them, really listen. Don't just hear, listen to them. And then the third key is to understand them. And if you change nothing else in your relationship with your teenager, always bear these in mind, as they underpin every successful relationship that we have. So I'm just going to go through them one at a time. I'm going to go back to the first one. So loving them. So as a human being, one of our most basic fundamental needs is to be loved and accepted. It doesn't, and when I say that, I don't mean that you have to love everything they do or that you have to accept poor behaviour. It just means love and accept them as a person separate to their behaviour. You know, they are still that same child that you adored in the first hours of their life, the same 5-year-old you applauded in the nativity. They might have become slightly awkward, or you might think they're even completely unrecognisable, but they are still your child, and your job, and I absolutely believe this, your job as a parent is to always have their best interests at heart. And really, really see their behaviour as something separate to them. You know, we can all change our behaviour if we want to enough and if we're supported enough. But the other thing is to not be passive, don't be weak, don't be wishy-washy with them. Let them know what you think. Explain to them if they've done something that you don't like, or that you feel you have to discipline them over. Explain to them what they have done is unacceptable, and that you're telling them because you love them. And this is how I had some questions actually earlier in the week about how you put boundaries in place with teenagers, and actually this is how you do it. Separate their behaviour from them. Explain to them very clearly that their behaviour is unacceptable, and that you're telling them and that you're putting these sanctions into place because you love them and because you believe that actually it's the best thing for them. Okay, so the second key is to listen to them. So again, this is one of our most basic needs. It's to be heard. And I hear a lot from teenagers that they get told what to do, but nobody actually listens to them. And, as adults, we might feel, and I'm sure, my mum used to say this to me all the time, and I've tried really hard not to say this, but I think it in my head sometimes, that actually we're much more experienced than our teenagers. We've lived life a bit, so we know what to do and what not to do. But, we learn through experience much more than what we're told. And yes, you are absolutely the expert with your teenager because you are their parent, but your teenager needs to learn their own lessons. So if you can encourage them to talk to you and you can really listen to them, here again is where you can put the boundaries in place. You can explain to them what you think, and you can explain to them, again, what you're doing is because you love them. And actually, to listen to them is really, really important, despite the bluff that they give us, and sometimes it's just ridiculous that, teenagers are in a very, very vulnerable and often scary time in their life. And they're often very uncertain about the decisions they have to make that they believe will shape their entire life. Kids in the lower sixth, they believe that whatever choice they make, which course they choose to do at uni, where they choose to go, that casts the die for the rest of their life. And of course, yes, it will influence their life, but it's not the be all and end all. And again, the boundaries that you set are their safety net. That is their support. And much as they say they want to live their life on their own, actually that they don't underneath it. They need your support and they expect some support from you. So, build confidence and trust while you listen to them, and acknowledge that they have their own point of view. You might not agree with them, but just acknowledge perhaps their view is different to yours. Because pushing them into doing something they don't want to do or they don't believe is good for them will actually just make things worse for you. And if they're resistant to you at a time when they need your support, that's when things can really, really unravel. So again, you know, be alert. You don't always have to, you know, sit them down and say, oh, you know, we're going to have a big chat. You know, when the right time is to step in and, you know, make that odd supportive comment. So by saying understand them, you know, what the classic teenage phrase is, oh, you just don't understand. You don't know. Life was different for you in the dark ages when you were a teenager. And actually, yeah, it is. You know, even, you know, I'm quite a young mum of teenagers, but, you know, my son's nearly 20, and 20 years ago, you know, I didn't have a mobile phone, I didn't have a computer, I did have a car, but, you know, all of that instant communication and all of that information that's pouring in all of the time, you know, we don't know what that's like for them. We can try to empathise and try to understand. You know, if it's a really horrible situation for your teen, if, you know, if you have no way of starting a communication because you have no common ground. So being open to their point of view will help them to feel that actually that you're trying at least to understand them. So the key to it, as I see it, really, so they're your underlying keys. The nuts and bolts of dealing with your teenager and them not becoming a puzzle is to have a system, a structure by which you can have great conversations with them. And I know what it's like to get into a kind of ever exploding argument, not just with my teenagers, but, you know, with my husband, with my parents. You know, if something pushes our buttons, we react and we become very emotionally charged, and it's, you know, you just get out of control, don't you? So what I think is really good is to have a structure for conversations. You don't have to follow it to the letter, but to have this in mind. It's like a sort of scaffold that you can hang your conversations on. So just very briefly, the steps are, the first step is just start having a conversation, just start having a chat and see what happens. And then delve a little bit deeper into what's going on. And then find out what the problem is. You know, what exactly is the problem? Is it a big thing? Is it a small thing that's been blown out of proportion? Does it need an answer? And then the next step is imagining and encouraging your teenager to imagine what their life would be like if that wasn't a problem anymore. And of course, how do they get into the future where there is no problem? What kind of decision can they make about that not being a problem anymore? So today, what I'm going to do is just go through the first step, because I've got about 10 minutes left. So I just want to give you some tips to be able to take away and to start on that 5-step program. So it sounds very easy. It might sound really, really obvious to say, just start talking to your teenager. But, you know, people phone me and people email me because they just can't talk to their teenager. They don't know how to approach a conversation. So although, yes, this is the easiest step, it's also the most difficult step. And if you're here today because you've decided that's what you need to do, then I'm going to give you some ways that you can do that. So this is the most important bit. Getting the beginnings of any conversation is really important, actually, before you even open your mouth and say anything. So just have a think. How many times have conversations ended in disaster because your teenager has asked you something really challenging or difficult, or has made a throwaway comment just as you're running out of the door to go to work, or you're rushing out to go to Pilates, or you need to go and do the shopping, you know, that, and you haven't actually got time to talk to them. Another situation is you've been to parents' evening and you try to raise something in the car. It's been a late night, it's been challenging. Are you surprised when you raise an issue from parents' evening and it just turns into a nightmare conversation? So the first thing I'm going to say, and I'm going to get you to write this down as well, is pick the right time. Pick the time. Choose your time when you're going to have a conversation. And that's true of everybody, but particularly true when you're talking to your teenager. So you might want to agree a time with them. You might want to say to them, oh, do you know, I think we need to just sort this out. We just need to explore this a bit. Can we agree a time when we're not going to be distracted by anything else, or you're not being busy, or you don't need to rush out in 10 minutes time? But also set a time limit and let your teenager know, you know, this isn't going to take any more than 10 minutes. And then they know they're off the hook. Or, and something I think is a really good way of having a conversation is having a casual conversation when you're in the car, because you're driving, so you're looking straight ahead out of the windscreen, so you can't look at them. Even if they look at you, you can't really take your eyes off the road. It keeps it a bit lighter and a bit less intense. So I'm going to suggest to you, maybe take your teenager to school once a week, or take them to football, or drop them off when they're going to Bromley shopping, you know, that, just so that you have a time with them on their own in the car in a less intense kind of way. So what you could do is mention something to them that you've observed that highlights something really positive about them. So before you have to get down to that sort of conversation about, oh, have you been smoking on the bus, or somebody said they saw you drinking in the high street, get into the habit of having conversations with them, and also get into the habit of having positive conversations with them. You know, you might want to say to them, oh, I noticed you put your clothes out in the washing. That's really helpful to me, that they're actually where I can find them. Thanks for doing that. Or something like, I noticed that you worked really, really hard this week to get that piece of homework in on time. And they might not respond in the way that you hope. They might grunt at you, or they might ignore you. But you know, everybody wants to be appreciated. So keep trying to do that, because they will hear that you appreciate them and that you love them. And of course, then that opens up a space for talking. But again, be sensitive with the timing and the situation. Try to keep it short. Teenagers, you know, they hate to be nagged. Don't we all hate to be nagged? If you need to talk to them about a mistake they've made, try to use words that perhaps, you know, recognise that they had good intentions, and that we all get it wrong from time to time. And it's actually the thing they've done that they've got wrong, and not because they are a bad person fundamentally. You know, you don't want them to believe that they are always getting it wrong, and that however hard they try, they can never get it right. You know, you want them to believe that with the best of intentions, we all get it wrong some of the time. You might also want to let your teenager know what to expect from a conversation, and actually ask them what they expect from a conversation. Think about what's going on in your teenager's head. You know, their experience of adult talks might be that they're always told what's going to happen and that they're never listened to. So explain to them that you're going to say what you think, and then they're going to say what they think, and that you're going to try and find some common ground. And also try to understand the kind of language that your teenager uses. You know, they have all these different words, and I guess we did as teenagers as well. But don't be put off by that. Just accept, you know, teenagers, they have their own identity as a group, and it's just a generational thing. And if you don't understand the kind of words that they're using, ask them without any kind of judgment what they mean. Okay, so that's the first step of my 5-step program. There's a few things actually that I've got down here that I did want to mention, but I'm really conscious of the time. So the whole system works together. The first step I've just explained to you is just that kind of casual, quite superficial level. And actually, I know that if you try and put this into practice today, it will make a huge difference to your conversations. There are these 5 steps. Once you've opened your lines of communication, you can learn more about how to unpack the puzzle or the problem that your teenager is having, and then work through that whole system and get through to working towards making a solution. So, let's go back a little bit there. So, okay, so it is 1:45 now. There are a few ways that I can help you with this 5-step program, but we're sort of running out of time now. And actually, I do feel that with relationships, it can be a really personal thing. And I know that parents that I've worked with, and even this week I had a conversation with a really lovely lady, and actually talking one-to-one through what's going on has much more value, I think, than actually working online in a program. So what I'd like to offer you today is a free session with me, and I'll just go through onto that slide that you just saw. So I don't think you can actually click on this link. I'm not actually 100% sure. You might be able to. That link goes through to a page of my online calendar, and I've opened up 10 slots in my diary. If you would like to have a free call with me, and actually it doesn't matter whether your children are teenagers or whether they're 20 or whether they're 10. If there's something that you're anticipating might be a problem, or that you're worried about might be a problem, book yourself one of those calls. They're for 30 minutes. We can just have a chat about, you know, what's worrying you. I can give you some takeaway tips that you can start using from the minute you put the phone down to me. And then we can decide if actually working with me on a program might benefit you. It's not appropriate for everybody. You know, sometimes on the free 30-minute call, I might give you some ideas and you might take them away and that might solve the problem. But sometimes there are bigger issues that perhaps you need some coaching around, and I can certainly help you with that. So all you have to do is go through on that link. It will take you through to a calendar, and you'll see that there are some slots available, and you just fill in the form for the slot that's best for you. So finally, I just want to leave you with something really, really positive. I use this quote all the time. I absolutely love it. And it doesn't just apply to teenagers, but because we're talking about teenagers today, it's quite relevant. Just because the past didn't turn out like you wanted it to, doesn't mean your future can't be better than you imagined. And, you know, we all go through tough times in all relationships, and possibly especially with our teenagers, because it's a time of rapid change. But I just want you to know that the past doesn't have to determine your future. And the future, actually, I find teenage years really, really exciting because, you know, they're just on the cusp of adulthood, and they've got all of these opportunities out there. And, you know, it's just, I think it's a brilliant time if you can get it right. So I just want to leave you with that thought that, you know, your future with your teenagers is really, really exciting. Their future is exciting. And it's, I find it very sad that actually, you know, many teenagers aren't excited about their future. And, you know, and I absolutely know that that you as their parents can actually help them with that. So I'm just going to leave you, that's pretty much all the content I want to give you today. So I just want to really thank you for giving up your lunchtime and spending it with me. I find, you know, I'm really honoured to be able to work with parents, and for parents to actually, you know, confide in me and explain to me what their problems are. You know, it's a huge honour to be able to help people like you. So I do hope that you feel you've learned something today, and about how you can make your parenting and your style with your teenager a little bit easier. I'm going to hang around for a few minutes, and I can see the chat box now. So if you do have any burning questions, you can either put them in the chat box now, or book a time, book a 30-minute slot, and we can either chat on Skype or on the phone. So yeah, that's it really. So thank you for joining me. Raven, and I'm from Well Kids Cracking the Teenage Puzzle. Okay, so there don't seem to be any questions. So if you'd like to book your free slot with me, that would be lovely, and I look forward to talking to you. So goodbye for now.